Last three tissues, muscular tissue. We're just going to do these as comparison contrast because there's three types and they have things in common and they have some differences. So let's talk about all three. And we'll sort of make a little diagram that goes in your diagram box on the bottom there. As far as the shape of the individual fibers, skeletal, smooth, and cardiac. The fibers in skeletal muscle can be really long. They can be up to a foot long. Smooth muscle is shorter, and it's usually fat in the middle and skinny at the ends. And then cardiac muscle is not as long as skeletal muscle and usually has blunt ends. So I'm going to scribble these on a whiteboard, and then we'll go back and forth to the whiteboard. Okay, so as far as the shapes of the cells, let's say skeletal muscle, elongated, imagine that way longer than that with blunt ends. Smooth muscle, generally kind of like an elongated eyeball shape, okay? And then cardiac muscle is long, not as long as skeletal muscle. This is not drawn to scale. And has blunt ends, but quite often it also branches, and we'll get to the branching in just a second. Okay, so what about the next thing? The next thing is the nucleus. So let's look at the three of them. So this is skeletal muscle. The nuclei are, so it's elongated and has blunt ends. The nuclei are peripherally located, meaning they're pushed up against the sides, generally speaking, and there's more than one per cell. This is, whoops, flip you little guy. This is cardiac muscle. Generally speaking, there's going to be one, oh, my mouse stopped working. Okay, there's going to be one big nucleus per cell, right there. One big nucleus per cell, not a whole bunch. You can see the diagram right here. And it's going to be centrally located. And then with smooth muscle, and this is smooth muscle for you. I don't know how the hell these things got flipped, but we'll work with it. One nucleus in the middle, okay? Kind of the same idea that we had with cardiac muscle. Okay, so now let's just scribble that into our little diagram. Okay, so skeletal muscle is going to have, it's going to be multinucleated, and they're generally peripheral. Smooth muscle, one nucleus in the middle. Cardiac muscle, one nucleus in the middle. Okay, so what else? Striated or not striated? Well, striations have to do with muscle fibers are so long and skinny that the whole thing is usually called a fiber instead of just being referred to as a cell. They're all involved in wiggling, but are they wiggling you, your whole body, or are they wiggling things around inside you? And then the striations. So this whole thing is going to be a muscle fiber, and the striations are going perpendicular to the muscle fiber. So skeletal muscle is striated. As a matter of fact, if you had it in 7th grade, sometimes your teacher actually calls it striated muscle tissue. But you can't do that because there are actually two striated muscle tissues. So this one is striated as well. The striations usually are not as distinctive in cardiac muscle as they are in skeletal muscle, but you can definitely see the hint of some striations. And this one is called smooth because it's not striated. So that's why it's called that. Okay, so striated or not striated for the three of them. Let's go back and scribble in the striations. Okay, so skeletal muscle is going to have striations that are running perpendicular to the long axis. Smooth muscle, no st. Cardiac muscle has striations running perpendicular as well. So, branched or unbranched? Well, the only one that if you get a good slide and follow it for a little while, you can see it branch like this here. The only one that really will branch dependably is cardiac muscle. And sometimes you can actually see it branching. So you see this one that's going that direction and that direction. You won't see every single cell branch, but you can certainly sometimes see some cells branching, like here. You're seeing them go two different directions there. That's cardiac muscle. In addition, with cardiac muscle, there's usually something that looks like a really dark striation. Do you see it there, like darker than the other ones? It's not actually a dark striation. What it is the boundary between one cell and the next. It's called an intercalated disc. So let's go ahead and scribble that one in on here. So the intercalated disc will look like a really dark striation, but what it really is the junction of that cell communicating with another cell. And it's actually, I don't know if you guys remember the types of cell junctions. It is actually desmosomes and gap junctions to allow for a strong connection between these two cells and also for communication. So this guy right here is called an intercalated disc. And the textbooks are never consistent with whether it's disc with a K or disc with a C. So I don't care if you are either. Okay. How about, we did branched or unbranched and striated or not striated, voluntary or involuntary. Well, you've been a person for a while. So your smooth muscle, like, can you decide it's really not an opportune time to have diarrhea and then just stop it by sheer force of will? You can't. Can you decide that you want your heart to stop beating really quickly when you're nervous? Can't really do that either, and you certainly can't stop it or start it. You can eventually, with a little time, impact your heart rate, but not immediately, and not directly. So the only tissue in your whole body actually that's under voluntary control is skeletal muscle. And it's not always voluntary, it's just usually voluntary. So if I, for instance, right now wanted to hold my breath to death, my diaphragm is skeletal muscle. If it was completely voluntary, I could just hold my breath to death, but I certainly can't. It's voluntary until you piss off the pH of your brain, and then it'll make you breathe whether you want to or not. Also, shivering is involuntary contraction of skeletal muscle, so it's usually voluntary. Locations of all of these three types of tissue. Skeletal is called skeletal muscle because it's generally attached to your bones, although not all skeletal muscle is attached to your bones. The muscles I'm using right now to do facial expressions, those are just pulling around my facial skin. But most skeletal muscle is attached to bones. These are attached to skin. Smooth muscle you find in the walls of hollow tubes and organs, anything but the heart. If it needs to wiggle stuff around through the tube or the organ, it's going to have smooth muscle in its wall. And then cardiac muscle is only found in the wall of the heart, hence the names. Okay, now as far as speed of contraction and the ability to remain contracted, and we've already got our diagrams done. Basically, if I use the metaphor for the three of these, one of them's a sprinter, really quick off the blocks, but will peter out really quickly as well. One of them is a long distance runner, not the fastest off the blocks, but will definitely outlast you. And the other one is intermediate, like a jogger. And so let's think about these three tissues. One of these three tissues is your emergency response tissue that can keep you from getting hit by a bus or eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. And that one's really fast off the block, but you cannot maintain contractions in it for an indeterminate amount of time. That's skeletal muscle. So it's really fast contraction, but it has a hard time maintaining the contraction for a long period of time. The other extreme is smooth muscle, which is kind of like dirt to dirt, right? It's never really fast off the block, but it can maintain a contraction forever. And then cardiac muscle is really intermediate between the two of those. Which brings me to what I always call the diarrhea race. And the diarrhea race is what happens when you pit smooth muscle in an irritated digestive tract against the little bitty skeletal muscle sphincter that is under voluntary control at the distal end of your digestive tract. Who is going to win? Well, it really depends upon whether you are trying to run a sprint or a marathon. If you sprint to the bathroom, you may win. Your skeletal muscle may win, and you may get to keep those underwear. If, however, you expect to be able to maintain that skeletal muscle contraction and that sphincter for a long period of time, you will never outlast the smooth muscle contraction of an irritated digestive system, and you're going to have to throw away your underwear in public, and that's not going to be a good day. Okay, so that is filled out that table. Okay, so let's just look at a few and make sure you're comfortable with identifying them. The one that people have trouble with, by the way, is that I want you to practice this because smooth muscle and dense regular connective tissue tend to look kind of similar, but here's the deal. Within smooth muscle, the nuclei are within the cells. In dense regular connective tissue, they're smashed between a whole bunch of collagen fibers. So see how these look like they're within the cells? And sometimes it's hard to see, but after you've looked at a few of them, you'll get better at it. So these are the figures out of your textbook, but now I want you to look at some others. Can you tell what this one is? There's only 3 choices. It's smooth muscle, skeletal muscle, or cardiac muscle. So how do I know? See striations, so that narrows it down to 2. What else do I see? Well, I see peripheral nuclei, multiple peripheral nuclei. Don't let this confuse you. That looks like it might be an intercalated disc, but it's not. Multiple peripheral nuclei. No branching. So that's skeletal muscle. This is also skeletal muscle. What is this one? One big nucleus, what looks like a dark striation, right? And branching in some of them. What is this one? This is cardiac muscle. This is also cardiac muscle. Again, these dark striations, the branching occurs, one big nucleus, that's cardiac muscle. This has nuclei within the eyeball-shaped cells, that's smooth muscle. What's this one? Striated, nuclei pushed off to the side, no real branching, no intercalated discs. This is skeletal muscle. That one's too hard. Okay, so don't look at this side because that will confuse you. Look at this side. What is this? No striations, nuclei in the middle, right? This is smooth muscle. This is actually the smooth muscle too. That's just a cross section, and this one's a longitudinal section. Don't worry, I wouldn't ask you a cross section at this point. Okay, so hopefully you're comfortable with muscular tissue now.